Most people are stuck in a system designed to work harder and not smarter. We're here to expose the strategies, the loopholes and the life hacks the 1% use. This is universal basic knowledge.
So I've always been a big car fan. And ever since I was a kid, I was always trying to figure out how can I afford the cars of my dreams, but for less money. It's a really hard problem to solve. What's the monthly payment? That's how most people buy their car, right? They go to the dealership, they buy it, look at the monthly payment. But what a lot of people don't know is that they're gonna get hit with something called the depreciation curve of a car. Quickly, if you don't know what this is, essentially it means the moment that you drive that car off the lot, you're gonna lose some value. But over the first year or two of that car ownership, you're gonna get hit with the depreciation curve, which is anywhere from 30 to 60% of the value of that car gone, right? So over the course of those 2 or 3 years, you were essentially paying to use that car quite significantly. I was trying to figure out, how do I hack the system? And what I figured out, I didn't know that it was called the depreciation curve at the time, is that certain cars don't go under a certain value after a period of time. And so typically what this is essentially looks like is that in that first 3 to 5 years, the car value slides, someone takes the hit, and then it kind of stops. Or the first 1 to 2 years, that's when the curve is gonna be the biggest. And after around year 3 or 5, it's going to level off, right? Now, if you have a car like a C-Class, a Series 3, something that you see everywhere, even if it's a nice car, because a BMW is a nice car, Mercedes is a nice car, you're gonna still hit this curve because think about the output. How many 3 Series do you see? How many 5 Series do you see? How many 7 Series do you see? And so these cars, everyone has them. And so it's highly, highly competitive. And if you don't know if you're in a highly competitive car, just go to Auto Trader or Car Guru or any of these websites, and you will literally see hundreds of your same model, and everyone's competing to the lowest value. Now, where the very unique circumstance that I had found when I was, in my early 20s is that exotic cars, there's very few of them, right? Generally very few of them, very few people buy them. And when I was trying to go and search for these exotic cars, I was having a really tough time finding one that fit my budget level, right? But what I realized, how does this 10-year-old Lamborghini or a 5-year-old Audi R8, and at the time, that's the car that I had my eyes set on, was an Audi R8. It was like my dream car in high school. I realized that their value had kind of just stayed stable at some point in time. So new, they cost $200,000 plus. But these used cars, and in some capacity, they were 10, 15 years old, they were just $80K, $90K. And they just sat there, right, for long periods of time because I had been thinking about this purchase for years, right? And I'm like, this value of these new cars just never drop. The price of the new car doesn't change, but the used car is also not really dropping over time. The thesis here is that exotic cars hit a certain level on that depreciation curve, and then essentially they sit there. So basically, if you look at some of these cars, they really stop losing value because there's always a demand for them because there's not more of them made. And in some cases, they become a collector's item. The more rare the car was, the less amount of people that have that vehicle. And if it's already hit its depreciation curve, the more likely that you're gonna find a good hack. So for me personally, I was able to find at the time an Audi R8 for around $95,000 that I ended up purchasing that car for. I owned that car for 8.5 years. And I ended up selling that car for approximately $70,000. And if you mathematically look at what my cost of ownership over that period of time, it was less than $200 a month. When my parents had a Ford SUV and they got it just from the dealer and they were paying $700 a month. And then they weren't able to sell it for the same value. So if you look effectively, it costs more for them to have that car than it costs me. Now, the counter argument that I always get from people is well, what about insurance? What about gas? What about this? And actually my insurance cost is lower on my Audi R8 than my friend who had a 3 Series because the way that insurance works is that they look at the overall population of people and how many wrecks occur with that vehicle. So a 3 Series, which everyone owns, right, is gonna get a lot more crashes than an Audi R8, right? Not many people own an Audi R8. And now it's more expensive, obviously, to fix an Audi R8. But if you look from a crash percentage, there's just not as many of them that get crashed, right? Because people, when they're driving that car, they're more careful, right? It's a certain type of person that owns that vehicle. So your insurance is actually cheaper with that vehicle. In addition, people are like, well, what about maintenance? Well, the reason I chose an Audi R8 is because Audi is a very well-made German car. Doesn't really cost a lot to maintain. And so I knew that the maintenance of that car was not gonna be too high. So my insurance was cheaper than if I would buy, for example, a 3 Series or any kind of normal, nice car. And ultimately, I was able to hack that car and own it for 8 years. And this is why most people look at car ownership as an expense. And it's not necessarily a wealth building strategy because generally you're not going to make money on a car unless you get a very special collector's car. There's some cars that have went from $500,000 like the Carrera GT, in 2018 to now it's like maybe $1.5 million or whatever. But those are very rare that's going to happen. But at the minimum, one of the ideas of universal basic knowledge is how can you thrive and have a lifestyle without having to spend extra money, and in some cases spending even less money than what the guy next door is. But the idea here is that by owning an exotic vehicle and you wait anywhere from 5 to 7 years and you can essentially car hack it. And this does apply to other cars. There are different levels. $90,000 is still a lot of money to put up for a vehicle. But ultimately, there are vehicles that are in the 30K, 40K, 50K range that you can essentially do this for. My number one tips to follow: don't buy a vehicle new. Wait those 3 to 5 years. Find rare models, right? And there's tools and tips. We'll probably do a deeper dive on this video of what cars to hack and how to think about it, how to get around some of these things like financing and other strategies around it, writing off. And that'll be a deeper dive that we'll do in our community. And so if this is interesting for you, feel free to join our free community. You're going to get a bunch of tools and tips and other ways to optimize your life and live like that 1%.